Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Red Bull have their first front row lockout for 4 years since 2018, but Lewis Hamilton is not at all happy with a recurring brake issue he's had for many races in a row now during qualifying that potentially hampered his final qualifying lap. Maybe he finishes P4 without it, but regardless, going to be a difficult Sunday for Mercedes. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. It of course was Vettel's final qualifying session as well, and he honestly was probably the only piece of entertainment in this qualifying session, to be perfectly honest. This was FP3, looking at where the teams were at this point. So the Red Bulls were clearly strongest. Their straight line speed is absolutely immense here, and it still is. And yeah, that was giving them a big advantage in Sector 2. It's funny that Albon appears here in Sector 2 because the Williams, yeah, they don't know how to put any downforce on the car. During FP3, Hamilton was running a bit of higher wing, so he was better in Sector 3, had the fastest Sector 3 during this session, but Russell had a lower wing, so he was getting about a tenth and a half during Sector 2 on Hamilton. So that was the debate that Mercedes had to answer. What was the way to go? Should they go for the lower downforce model? Should they go for the higher downforce model? They went for the higher downforce approach, didn't really pay dividends come qualifying. This was a big instant though during FP3. The red flag comes out at one point, and Hamilton is on a flying lap. There's two cars he's passing here. He sees at this point the red flag on this. Now it looks kind of yellow here, but I'm pretty sure that it's actually just red. And as soon as he sees it, basically there was some talk about this because you're not allowed to overtake under yellow flag or certainly red flag conditions. He did overtake two cars. I'm pretty sure he was already passing Norris by the time it came out, and by the time the red flag came out, like his speed delta to, I think, Stroll or whoever that was, maybe it was Magnussen, was like way too significant to actually slow down in time. But there were questions there in terms of consistency, right? Because if the rules say that, well, if you overtake under red flag conditions, that's a penalty, like, you know, what exactly is going on? So what they did is they looked at a similar instance, in fairness, that happened last year at the Dutch Grand Prix for Max Verstappen, where no action was taken for a similar circumstance. They found that he immediately lifted the throttle and applied the brakes immediately while checking his mirrors for the cars in close proximity, and that therefore it's okay. You know, they found out that he lifted immediately, that he braked as much as he could, but he was just going too fast to not overtake that other car. And yeah, said that basically he took every reasonable action to comply with the regulations. So yeah, pretty crazy stuff, right? The steward's actually making a pretty reasonable and well-informed decision based on prior circumstances. Makes people wonder why they can't do stuff like this more often, but I think people think this is probably a reasonable analysis, all things considered. Let's go into qualifying then. Sebastian Vettel, as I say, he was the highlight of this session. He was killing it. His lap, firstly in Q1, was just stellar. Towards the end of the session, needed to do a good lap. Stuck it into P5, I think it was at the time. The other guys have improved around him. But it was awesome to watch. But already in Q1, Hamilton was complaining again about the brakes. So this is an issue that's gone back for several races. I remember even in Silverstone, I think on the grid, they were changing his brake discs. Because basically, the situation is for Mercedes. Seems like both drivers suffer with this. Maybe Hamilton more so than Russell for whatever reason. But the brakes need to be the same temperature. If they're the same temperature, they'll do the same amount of work going into the corner. But for some reason in qualifying, Mercedes have this kind of brake split issue where one of the brakes is at a higher temperature than the others, and they can't seem to control this very well, such that when they brake into a corner, one kind of, brake is doing more work than the others, and therefore it's really difficult to judge. Let's say you're going into a tight left-hander, like into turn 6, if one of your brakes is hotter than the other one and is therefore, doing more or less work, then actually making that corner work without locking up becomes increasingly difficult, and you might have to brake a bit earlier, be a bit more careful on the brakes. It's going to cost you time dealing with these issues, and they've had this now for Mercedes for ages, and that clearly it's not something they've been able to reasonably fix. They go back into the pits, they cool down his brakes, or they tried to, and then he says, look, the brake issue is still a problem when he came out again, and that of course is going to affect your confidence as well. You can't attack the corner quite like you'd like to if you know the brakes might lock up on you at any moment because they're not perfectly, the temperature coefficient isn't quite right. We saw this even back, this is Mexico, when they were changing his brakes in the garage. This happened as well the week before in Austin on the grid. It happened, I don't know if it was really a problem in Brazil, but I guess it was cool there anyway because it was raining and stuff, so probably a different set of circumstances. But yeah, nonetheless interesting, and we'll come back to this here in a second after we talk the rest of qualifying. Q1, Magnussen, P16, crazy stuff in a way just because he got pole last time outright in Brazil, and I think it was Mick Schumacher who was P11, so did a great job Mick to get through Q1. Magnussen didn't, so maybe sending a final message, right, to say to Haas, you shouldn't have got rid of me. Gasly, Bottas, Albon, Latifi. Latifi finishing his final qualifying in Formula 1 in P20, that is tradition. Also, not really traditional, but Bottas out in Q1. Impressive performance from Zhou, I thought, to get through to Q2 here. And also big for Aston Martin, because they're fighting Alfa Romeo for places in the championship, and this was a big and very important Q1 exit here for, well, Bottas in that fight. And it was around about this time we got to see what Mercedes pace was really going to be like? Because in the weekend, Mercedes had looked pretty good in most of the practice sessions. Okay, they were losing a bit of time in the middle sector, gaining it back in the final sector. But when it came into actual quali conditions, like the straight line speed differential between the Red Bulls and the Mercedes was just immense. Like they were losing 5/10 just in one sector to Perez on just the two straights in that sector. So yeah, that's basically where Mercedes' differential really was. And even Seb was not happy about his former team in Red Bull, because 3 laps in a row in his kind of quali laps, he was blocked by a Red Bull. Twice, I think, by Perez, once by Verstappen. Thankfully, didn't affect him, and he actually made it to Q3 fantastically well. But again, Hamilton's on the radio, brakes are an issue, Bono. Like, what are you going to do about it? Nothing they can really do about it, but it's still a recurring issue for them, which is obviously affecting his performance. So Tsunoda goes out P12, Alonso P11. They think that Alpine, they've got this in the bag in terms of getting P4 in the constructors over McLaren. McLaren would have to outscore Alpine by 19 points, which realistically is not going to happen with the cars ahead of Norris and Riccardo in the race. Schumacher P13, Stroll, Zhou, Tsunoda. And that put Vettel, of course, into Q3. He did some great laps, and here he only had one set of new tyres left, so he could only do one run here in Q3. Put together a great lap, though, again, went P7 with it, eventually ended up P9. But yeah, it was great to see Vettel just killing it on his final session. I'm sure people watched this and thought, come on, Seb, do you need to retire? Like, he's obviously still got the ability, but I guess the Aston Martin has taken it out of him the last couple of seasons. Can't really blame him for that, but that car is getting better and better, especially because next season Alonso is going to be stepping into that seat. So this is how it sat at the time. Verstappen had just gone fastest by 3/10, but it looked like he was out of track limits, to be honest. It was very borderline, if so. They would have really need to get the enhancement tools out if he, let's say, messed up his final lap or something. So yeah, Sainz was P2 at the time, and it was quite clear that Hamilton and Russell, the things with Hamilton and Russell, they're always so close in time generally that you really know where the Mercedes is. It's not like, the drivers are so similar in terms of quali pace and generally race pace as well, that you can really see how good the Mercedes actually is. You don't really have this delta between teammates that you get in other teams. You can't really tell how good the car is sometimes. But it's always just neck and neck with the two Mercedes drivers. Vettel, Riccardo, Ocon, Norris it was at the time, but Norris put a good lap in right at the end as well. And these were the top 3. So Verstappen, Perez, Leclerc, the first 1-2 lockout. This is a crazy stat, right? For 4 years now, they've not had a 1-2 lockout since, I think, Mexico 2018 was the last time there was a 1-2 lockout for Red Bull. And yeah, I guess Perez has never really achieved that. Crazy to think it's never really happened with Verstappen and Perez, certainly after the season that they've had. Leclerc P3, he'll kind of be ruining his chances because he made a couple of mistakes, could have had a better exit out of the chicane, and that might have given him a chance to get P2 over Perez here, which would be important going into tomorrow, right? Because Verstappen, you'd imagine, will just tow Perez along in his DRS train for, to potentially secure that P2 in the Drivers' Championship. Now, Hamilton was on a pretty decent lap. He'd gone purple sector 1, lost again about 5/10 to the Red Bulls in sector 2, just on pure straight line speed, because, the Mercedes is a draggier car, and they ran it with, the draggiest possible setup they could have gone for. So they were kind of asking for it, to be honest, but they're hoping it works out for Sunday. We'll see in a second. So Hamilton's yeah, I lost it out of turn 14 under the hotel. He had a bit of a moment, had to correct it, probably lost him maybe a tenth and a half, something like that. And yeah, the lap was looking good. I think they said he was 3/10 up on his previous lap going into that point. He lost a bit of time there. That might have been good enough to get over Sainz and get P4. In the end, he was P5. Russell was P6, separated by, I think, 0.003 of a second. So that just shows how close the Mercedes guys are. But yeah, Hamilton again after quali finishes on the radio. It's the braking problem, mate. It needs fixing. So that's what he reckons caused that issue, because tries to brake into that corner a little bit. One brake has more temperature than the other one, locks up in a weird way, gets a bit of a moment. But also not ideal from a mental perspective that you've got to go into corners thinking about that possibility and how you might deal with it. So these were the eventual kind of placings here. Verstappen, Perez, Leclerc, Sainz, Hamilton. There was 3/10 really between Sainz and Hamilton here. So maybe if he doesn't make that mistake, he maybe gets P4, but probably not too much better than that. And this is Toto Wolff's perspective on it, saying, yeah, terrible day, put it in the bin. Well, they've had enough, I suppose, of this car in this season. And basically saying that their perspective was here to try and put the downforce on to have a better race car tomorrow. But that obviously, caught them really off guard today in qualifying in terms of their pace differential to the top teams, especially Red Bull with that straight line speed. And they were still losing in the corners on the whole over the course of the lap. And also talking about this brake issue that they've got to fix over the winter.
Yeah, today's, I just heard World Toilet Day, so I think that's one to put in the toilet.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, you did not look so bad all weekend, but did you expect Ferrari to slip in there ahead of you?
I think we just got we didn't get the job done. I think we went backwards and they did a little step forward, but We went on a high downforce, high drag concept in order to have a good race car tomorrow, and that was just so slow on the straights that it didn't give anything.
Okay, because George tried the lower downforce in free practice 3. Did you think about putting one car on one different one and one on the other?
Yeah, but then we had the belief that for tomorrow it's so much better to have more downforce to protect the tires. Let's see.
Okay, and Lewis said on the radio we need to fix this braking issue. What's that about?
Yeah, we have this odd brake split situation that practically every qualifying session they start the lap and the brake splits. That means the left is not doing what the right does, and that's then unsettles the car in braking.
So one for the winter then?
A big one for the winter, yeah.
So the theory would be for Mercedes, right, that, okay, if they've got more downforce, they save the tyres better, because this was one of their observations from the long runs on Friday, that their tyre deg was actually, surprisingly for Mercedes, worse than the other teams in terms of, how quickly the tyres were going away from them. So they need to make sure that's okay. That's their key advantage in the race for tomorrow over Ferrari, theoretically. And okay, higher downforce should allow them to preserve their tyres better, and that, I guess, is what they're going for. Maybe they sacrifice qualifying as a result, but I'm sure they didn't expect to be this far off the pace. But what do you guys think about this brake issue, right? Hamilton's talked about this for a long time now. Back in Silverstone, it was a thing. This is in the US Grand Prix right here, where again, they had to change his kind of, brakes right before the race again, because they were causing him issues on the warm-up lap, on the lap that they do before the formation lap even begins. So, I don't know what you guys think about this. Can they fix it over the winter? I guess it's probably a budget cap thing that they've had this issue for quite some time, and they've thought, let's just chalk it up because we don't have the money to solve this problem now. Thankfully, I suppose for them, it didn't affect them for that 1-2 back in Brazil. But, still a recurring issue that Hamilton is not all that happy about. And of course, what that does mean is that, probably both of Hamilton's records, every season he competed in, he's taken a pole. Every season he competes in, he's got a win, is probably going to end tomorrow as well, because obviously one of those streaks ended today. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.